Mr. Twit was a horrid man.
Mr. Twit was no better. One morning, Mr. Twit wasn't looking. She took out her glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's beer.
Mr. Twit sat slowly drinking the beer. He was trying to think of a really nasty trick he could play on his wife.
You're planning something,
Said Mrs. Twit, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see her. She had taken out her glass eye.
You better be careful, because I'm watching you like a wombat.
Oh, shut up, you old hag.
Said Mr. Twit, as he tipped down the last of the beer. He saw the glass eye staring at him.
I told you, I'm watching you. I have eyes everywhere.
To play Mrs. Twit back for the glass eye in the beer, Mr. Twit slipped a frog between her bed sheets. Then he got in his own bed and waited for the fun to begin.
Mrs. Twit climbed into bed and put out the light.
There's something in my bed.
Oh, but it's a giant skillwigger. I saw one on the floor. I tried to kill it, but it got away. It's got teeth like screwdrivers.
Help me, save me. It's all over my feet.
It'll bite your toes off. Your toes.
Mrs. Twit fainted.
Mr. Twit poured a jug of cold water over her head to revive her.
When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had jumped on her face.
Wait a minute. It's a frog.
The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog, Miss Twit put some worms in her husband's plate of spaghetti.
The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled cheese.
Hey, my spaghetti's moving.
It's a new kind of It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious.
She took a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms.
Mr. Twit started eating.
It's not as good as ordinary kind. It's too squishy.
Mrs. Twit waited till Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful.
Do you want to know why your spaghetti was squishy?
Why?
Because it was worms.
To pay Miss Twit back for the worms in the spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really clever, nasty trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of the bed and took her walking stick downstairs to his workshack. There he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, into the bottom of the stick.
This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small, the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. Every night after that, Mr. Twit crept downstairs and added another tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like the part of the old stick.
Gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer, but it was all so slowly and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder. Mr. Twit said to her,
That stick's too long for you.
Why? So, it is. I have a feeling there's something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think what it was.
There's something wrong, all right.
What could have happened? It must have suddenly grew longer.
Don't be a fool. How can your walking stick grow longer? That's made of dead wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow.
And then what on earth has happened?
It's not the stick. It's you. It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing from some time.
That's not true.
You're shrinking, woman.
It's not possible.
Oh, yes, it is. You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days.
Never.
Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk. You've got to shrink. You've got the shrinks. That's what you've got. You've got the dread shrinks.
Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly that she had to sit down.
but when she did, Mr. Twit pointed at and shouted,
There, you have it. You're sitting in your old chair. You've shrunk so much your feet aren't even touching the ground.
Mrs. Twit looked down at her feet, and sure enough, the man was right.
You see, every night when Mr. Twit had stuck a little bit extra onto the stick, he had done the same thing to the legs of Mrs. Twit's chair.
Just look at you sitting in your same old chair. And you've shrunk so much, your feet are dangling in the air.
Mrs. Twit went white and with fear.
You've got the shrinks. You've got them bad. You've got the most terrible case of the shrinks I've ever seen.
Mrs. Twit grew so frightened she began to dribble.
But Mr. Twit, still remembering the worms in his spaghetti, didn't feel sorry for her at all.
I suppose you know what happens to you when you get the shrinks.
What happened?
Your head shrinks into your neck, and your neck shrinks into your body, and your body shrinks into your legs, and your legs shrink into your feet. And in the end, there's nothing left but a pair of shoes and a bundle of clothes.
I can't bear it.
It's a terrible disease, the worst in the world.
How long do I got? How long before I end up as a bundle of old clothes and a pair of shoes?
At the rate you're going, I'd say not more than 10 or 11 days.
But everything we can do,
There's only one cure for the shrinks.
tell me quickly.
We'll have to hurry.
I'm ready. I'll hurry. I'll do anything you say.
You won't last long if you don't.
What must I do?
You've got to be stretched.
Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching.
There were 100 balloons and lots of string. There was a gas cylinder for filling the balloons.
There was an iron ring fixed to the ground. He pointed to it and said,
Stand here.
He tied Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas.
Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Mrs. Twit. Some he tied around her neck, some under the arm, some to her wrist, and some even to her hair.
Soon there were 50 colored balloons in the air above Mrs. Twit's head.
Can you feel them stretching you?
I can't. They're stretching me like mad.
He put on another 10 balloons.
The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground, her arm pulled upward by the balloon, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner. But Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave.
When Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something foolish.
Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground? If these strings around my ankles break, it's goodbye for me.
And that's what gave Mr. Twit
His second nasty idea.
The